Hello, and welcome back to Voices of Hope. We have the three veils of the cross here in the studio with us. We will be looking at Mark 15:33, verse 37, and then jumping over to Matthew 27:51 through 52. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And Jesus cried with a loud voice, and gave up the ghost. Of the veil of heaven it is forbidden to speak on, else would he not have covered it. Sure, God is holy and cannot look upon sin. Let us leave aside the fact for a moment as to whether the iniquity of the world was laid on him or not. Sure, Isaiah 53:6 testifies of such. But never at any moment has he ceased from being God. He might be made of no reputation, as in Philippians 2:7, for a time, yet still there remains the I am of John 18:6, which caused all his accusers to fall over backwards. Even as the sinless Lamb of God at such a time as this, was he also divinity. So it can be seen as almost irreverent to think less. It seems that some places are the Lord's alone on which to speak. I should think that perhaps he would not have covered it so if he had wanted me to comment upon it. Thus I shall refrain from speaking on the veil of heaven and that touching the Spirit. This is due to the strong injunction given by Matthew 12:32 regarding whoso speaks against the Spirit. Scripture says they heap judgment unto themselves both in this life and in the one to come. Note the words, "it will not be forgiven," carefully, and mark such a one. Herein does the burden fall on the speaker of one such a word, rather, and not upon the hearers thereof at all. This is why I will refrain myself from uttering any such. The fear of the Lord is strong as well it should be. In this text we behold as though for the first time the separation between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, while they are the same. Some things in this present life are always seen, as through a glass darkly, according to 1 Corinthians 13:12. Then let us look very briefly into it, if you will. The Spirit was not always separate yet distinct, nor had the Son always dwelt among men. Revelation 21:3 tells how he will make his dwelling place among them as at the last. In times of old he came upon whom he would, even his chosen. It was so until all his good pleasure, as Isaiah 55:11 says, was accomplished. So King Saul once found to his hurt when the Lord left him, following his sin of 1 Samuel 16:14, in favor of another. King David also, as in Psalm 51:11, lived in constant fear of the Spirit being taken from him, what with his various wanderings and all. Perhaps you have heard how the spirit leaves the body during an especially traumatic event, usually surrounding death. Well, at least it does in Asian cultures. I am not too sure about the rest of you, but that is just what happens over there. Here it happened to Jesus as well. It is important to note that he has not at any time ever been lost or no less God, for he has always been that way. And I mean that to say, he has never been lost, and he has always been God. I care not if it is yesterday, today, or tomorrow, as Hebrews 13:8 testifies. He is the same forever. My friends, God has not changed, nor has He abandoned you, as some are wont to think. You might feel like you are in a situation now, on the cross right now, feeling abandoned by the Father now, yet at no time have you ever been alone. Thus, the spirits of the righteous made perfect is the first veil. Notice how the darkness came over the whole land and how long it lasted. It was a situation far worse than any comet could ever produce. I do not know if any of you remember the panic the first comet produced. Some people back then thought the world was going to end, and they still do to this day. Regardless, that is neither here nor there. Notice, if you will, the totality of the darkness. It was such that heaven itself was obscured from the vision of all. See, when our eye is dark, how great is that darkness. So Matthew 6:23 makes it clear of all the bad things which followed. Yet the darkness was not to keep man from looking up, but rather heaven from looking down. It was a veil, if you will, that signified the Son of God, judging by the testimony of those standing by. Such a darkness had not been seen or heard from since the very beginning. For if by him, of Colossians 1:17, all things hold together, without him all things fall apart. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain, from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. In this we see the second veil, spread across the temple, hid from prying eyes. It was this veil, then, which kept the Holy of Holies safely apart. God has created man in Genesis 1:27. From the beginning it was so. The veil of the temple, then, just as man, was plainly visible, being made by man at God's command for all to see. The source of the matter is the things of men. Created solely for the purpose of keeping mankind out, it served as a barrier to the holiest place of God. Exodus 13:21-22 tells how he made his home with them in times before, a pillar of fire by day and night. I can almost hear you now. That says a cloud. Yes, fire might not be a cloud, but what does a fire barely suppressed do? It smolders, producing a great cloud of smoke, as the intensity of it burns underneath without ceasing. It might sound tedious at first, but it is important that you understand. It was behind this veil the priest went to offer sacrifice for sin, as in Hebrews 9:11-15. Now whether that would be once yearly or an everyday occurrence is another matter entirely. How many of you know that service to God should rarely be unreasonable, be that your own body or that of another? Here also is the holiest place reserved for God alone, which kept all others out. At Christ's death, the debt for sin was satisfied and payment made. It is as though the Father said, "That is enough," and tore the veil down between the two. Therein is seen the promise of another, even the Comforter, who would guide them into all truth, of John 16:13. On Pentecost, then, are the promises fulfilled. With the holiest place opened, it seems God walked among man once more. Yet beyond that it represented something else. Just as the priest before could only enter in, and that was with something for sin. But here are heaven's gates flung open wide, with all welcome, who had come inside. Now I can almost hear your startled gasp. Does that mean the fallen too? Yes, dear church, indeed it does. Whosoever will means whosoever will, and whomsoever won't is in a bad position indeed. Now I know that tends to scandalize a whole lot of folks. Some have even gone so far as to teach doctrines which tend to relegate the grace of God. This serves several ends, one to keep another out, and two to penalize them for their sin. I do not know about you, but that is not of God. Indeed, his blood was shed for all, as you are about to find, be they ministering spirits, the souls of men, or even the most fallen. It is a 3-for-1 message, if you will. One sacrifice unites the world by the blood of his cross. This is the sum of the third and final veil at last. Here is seen the spirits of the fallen held in prison. 1 Peter 3:18-20 tells it was for their disobedience long before the flood began. So it describes them thus, and in need of a certain word. Looking back, the Lord had just created a perfectly beautiful world. Back then, there was nothing wrong with it. But you mean to tell me that the devil, once known as Lucifer, had suddenly developed a rather severe case of anxiety. See, had he believed the God of Philippians 4:6, he might have approached the Lord with his anxious-for-nothing self, rather than going to seek some additional help. Herein is seen how fear and rebellion almost always stem from the underlying belief that God is not good. Taste and see that the Lord is good, in Psalm 34:8 indeed. But some of us must be led kicking and screaming, because we trust that it is not so. Well might this one that feared ask for some words of encouragement, straightening, or of the Master from another at any time. Indeed, some servants like this one are no help at all. Instead, as Luke 12:45-46 tells, these are given instead to much riot, smiting everything in sight. Not content with that, these wicked servants began to party with the drunken. Now that we are back where I began, let us see very briefly the purpose of the cross. The text says that when Jesus died, the graves of many of the saints were opened, allowing for their resurrection. Now, that would not have happened otherwise without such a word as this. For how could one man forgive the sins of one, let alone atone for those of many? So then, this veil is of the earth, which also tore in two, allowing the saints before to rise. My, what a powerful word Christ speaks, indeed, better even than the blood of Abel gone before. Then at last the Scripture tells how Jesus went himself to preach to them that had been imprisoned. It happened that Isaiah 9:2 might be fulfilled. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them has the light shined. His message is for all, my friends. Some of you would do well to stop hanging out with doubting Thomas and go find yourself a more faithful friend. Matthew 27. When the morning was come, all the chief priests and elders of the people took counsel against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away, and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned, and that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple, and departed, and went and hanged himself. And the chief priest took the silver pieces, and said, It is not lawful for to put them into the treasury, because it is the price of blood. And they took counsel, and bought with them the and bought with them the potter's field, to bury strangers in. Wherefore that field was called the field of blood unto this day. Then was fulfilled that which is spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord appointed me. And Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Are you the King of the Jews? And Jesus said unto him, You sayest. And when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, Hearest you not how many things they witness against you? And he answered him to never a word, insomuch that the governor marveled greatly. Now at that feast the governor was wont to release unto the people a prisoner, whom they would. And they had then a notable prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they were gathered together, Pilate said unto them, Whom will you that I release unto you, Barabbas, or Jesus, which is called Christ? For he knew that for envy they had delivered him. When he was sat down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have you nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitude that they should ask for Barabbas, and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said unto them, Whether of the twain will you that I release unto you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate says unto them, What shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? They all say unto him, Let him be crucified. And the governor said, Why, what evil has he done? But they cried out the more, saying, Let him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that rather a tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See ye to it. Then answered all the people, and said, His blood be on us and on our children. Then released he Barabbas unto them. And when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the common hall, and gathered unto him the whole band of soldiers. And they stripped him, and put on him a scarlet robe. And when they had platted a crown of thorns, they put it upon his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him, and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit upon him, and took the reed, and smote him on the head. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe off from him, and put his own raiment on him, and led him away to crucify him. And as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross. And when they were come unto a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of skull, they gave him vinegar to drink, mingled with gall. And when he had tasted thereof, he would not drink. And they crucified him, and parted his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled which is spoken by the prophet, They parted my garments among them, and upon my vesture did they cast lots. And sitting down they watched him there, and set up over his head the accusation, and set up over his head his accusation written, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Then were there 2 thieves crucified with him, one on his right hand, and another on the left. And they that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads, and saying, You that destroyest the temple, and buildest in 3 days, save yourself. If you be the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise also the chief priests, mocking him with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he be the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the Son of God. The thieves also which were crucified him cast the same in his teeth. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? That is to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some of them that stood there when they heard it said, This man calls for Elias. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave him to drink. The rest said, Let be, let us see whether Elias will come to save him. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain, from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came up out of the grave, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him watching Jesus saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, Truly this was the Son of God. And many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him, among which was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joses, and the mother of Zebedee's children. When the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. He went to Pilate and begged the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. And when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre, and departed. And there was Mary Magdalene, and the other Mary, sitting over against the sepulchre. Now the next day that followed, the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, After 3 days I will rise again. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last error shall be worse than the first. Pilate said unto them, You have a watch. Go your way, make it as sure as you can. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting a watch. Until next time on Voices of Hope.